Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Thursday. That means Poetry Thursday, where the coolest cats on BookTube talk about poetry, read you a poem, maybe even some egregious offenders wax on and on about that poem. No names in particular. And I have, as usual, as I do so often on this channel, made an unending psychodrama out of this whole innocent event. I am walking my way through this book, 20th Century American Poetry, poet by poet, poem by poem, giving you a couple of poems or one poem from each and talking about it a bit as we progress towards the death of poetry as a popular genre. The death of poetry as a thing where an ordinary person is going to walk into a bookstore, they're going to look at the thrillers, they're going to look at the science fiction, they're going to look at the bestsellers, they're going to look at the poetry, and they'll be equally likely to buy something from any one of those sections. That used to be true. That used to be true. Executives and vice presidents at life insurance companies used to buy volumes of poetry at Brentano's and read it, take something from it. And that changed. And it changed in America, and it changed in one particular year, and it changed in the 20th century. And suddenly poetry became not only a gated community, but a gated community to which no one anymore had the keys. We haven't reached that point yet, but we're getting closer all the time. In fact, we're getting so close that now some of the poets that we're going to be looking at will have work that was published before that date and after, which will give us a pretty clear diagnostic of what's going on. Now, that is the point that we're at today, because today we are dealing with the insufferable John Berryman, who had a very long career as a pompous litigator of the genre and who was utterly unhappy if the spotlight of the world shifted away from him by even a couple of candle powers. He was voluminously unhappy if that happened. We don't have to go into his biography. As far as I know, there hasn't been a good biography of him. I'd like to read one. I'd certainly like to read a new one. But we're going to read two of his poems. One from 1948 and one from 1964. In order for me to point out a few things. So we'll read from 1948, we'll read Desires of Men and Women. And I will make a few bloviating observations, and then we'll read the next poem. So here is Desires of Men and Women. Exasperated, worn, you conjure a mansion, the absolute butlers in the spacious hall, old silver, lace, and privacy, a house where nothing has for years been out of place, neither shoehorn nor affection been out of place, breakfast in summer on the eastern terrace, all justice and all grace. At the reception, most beautifully you conduct yourselves, expensive and accustomed, bow, speak French, that quinquecento miniature recall the Duke presented you to your great-grandmother. And none of us, my dears, would dream of you the half-lit and lascivious apartments that are in fact your goal, for which you'd do murder if you had not your cowardice to prop the law, or dream of you the rooms glaring and inconceivably vulgar, where now you are, where now you wish for life, whence you project your naked fantasies. So, so the general gist of the poem is pretty clear, and also pretty forceful. The narrator of the poem is talking about a coterie of young women, by extension a class of young women, who will do anything, mortgage anything at all, to get that glittering lifestyle that they think they want. This is the House of Mirth. And the poem is fairly excoriating along those lines, dreaming up the perfect lifestyle that these women imagine, and contrasting it with the squalid circumstances where they live and the extremities they would go to get what they want. It's good. That is a familiar refrain, of course. That is present in Propertius and Catullus. It's thousands of years old. It's a little fussy. The poem is a little fussy, and also a little bit brainy, a little bit intellectual. Keep in mind, Berryman always said that you misunderstand me. I'm a scholar who just happens to be a great poet. So you get. The first word of this poem is exasperated. The last line is whence. It starts with whence you project. It's a little bit, for 1948, it's a little bit eggheady. It's a little bit, I don't want to say pretentious, because it gets its point across. And it does so, I think, without much pretense. It's effective. It has a moral edge to it. It's effectively done. And now we're going to read another poem from John Berryman, the insufferable John Berryman, and this one is from his masterpiece Dream Songs, and it takes place fatally 20 years later. It was written much later. We're going to read, we're not going to read all of Dream Songs. Dream Songs is a whole book on its own. We will read just the very first portion of Dream Songs. And I'm sure you can find a big collection of Berryman at your bookstore. Or I can find it for you if you insist. Obviously, you all know you can play me like a fiddle. I don't have to like the author you're looking for to find you a copy of the book. But let's read the beginning here. And I will also show you something. Show you something, you say? Why would I need to show you anything? Yeah, why would I? We'll read first. Huffy Henry hid the day. Unappeasable Henry sulked. I see his point, a trying to put things over. It was the thought that they could do it that made Henry wicked and away. But he should have come out and talked. All the world, like a woolen lover, once did seem on Henry's side. Then came a departure. Thereafter nothing fell out as it might or ought. I don't see how Henry, pride open for all the world to see, survived. What he was now to say is a long wonder the world can bear and be. Once in a sycamore I was glad all at the top, and I sang. Hard on the land wears the strong sea, and empty grows every bed. When the first poem was saying, none of us, my dears, would dream of you, the half-lit and lascivious apartments that are in fact your goal, for which you'd do murder if you had not your cowardice to prop the law. When the narrator of that first poem says that, you know what he means. You know what he's talking about. He's not specifying the young women involved, but you know what he's talking about. Do you have any idea what's being talked about in the first part of Dream Songs that I just read? Any idea at all? Let's take a look. All the world like a woolen lover. What is a woolen lover? Aren't lovers people? Are people made of wool? What is a woolen lover? Once did seem on Henry's side, then came a departure. Thereafter nothing fell out as it might or ought. I don't see how Henry, pride, open for all the world to see, survived. What happened to Henry? You might say, well, maybe this is going to be made subsequently clear later on in Dream Songs, which is a long poet cycle. Okay, fine. But this is the first part of it, consciously set apart by the author as such. Do you have any idea what's happening to Henry? And why he would be pried open? Did he have an appendectomy? When we get the last stanza, what he has now to say is a long wonder the world can be and bear and be. Once in a sycamore I was glad all at the top, and I sang. A sycamore is a tree. You were in a sycamore? You were on a sycamore? Was the narrator climbing a sycamore? What does a sycamore have to do with anything? What does it have to do with Henry? No idea. None at all. No. Hard on the land wears the strong sea, and empty grows every bed. Okay, well, that sounds very resonant, but what does it mean? What does it mean? The first poem from 1948 is no clearer in its specifics, but you know what every part of it means. Here, Huffy Henry, okay, unappeasable. He sulked. I see his point, a trying to put things over. It was the thought they could do it that made Henry wicked and away. But he should have come out and talked. Okay, that sounds like it's describing something. But it sounds like it's describing something that the author has clearly in mind and is not going to describe to you. If that sounds familiar in any way. That makes no sense. It makes sense to the author, but it doesn't make sense to you. He's not bothering to explain it to you. And I want to show you something. This is the first line of part 1. What's that? What's that? Why is there space there where almost a word would be? There's no word missing. You can read it and see. There's no word missing. Why is there space there? And you might say, oh, come on. I mean, what difference does it make? So there's a little space in the line. Why is it there? Would someone consider, would the insufferable John Berryman have considered that this poem was printed wrong if that space weren't there? Yes, he would have. Would any of his black turtleneck fans from the basement of the Cantab Lounge in Cambridge, would they say that it was printed wrong if that space wasn't there? That the poem was incorrect if that space wasn't there? That that space is important to the poem? Yes, they would say that. 1964. Of course, a space is not art. Sorry for you E.E. Cummings fans, but a space is not art. A space has no artistic merit at all. If you're putting artistic merit on it, well, then it's possible that you're referring to the poet's own idiosyncratic view of things that he is not telling you. Why is that space there? I don't know. I guess you'd have to know the insufferable John Berryman, or maybe one of his disciples. You'd have to know them. Oh, you don't know them? Oh, well, then I guess maybe you're not smart enough to know this poem. Oh, you don't know who Henry's supposed to be? Oh, Woolen Lovers makes perfect sense if you know who he is. You don't know? That is what's called navel gazing. That is what's called circular reference. It starts to show, it shows there where it didn't show in the earlier verse, an entire poetic ethos that is different. An entire poetic ethos that is based on self-reference without regard to the audience. If you do that, if you make your poetry a closed loop where you are either in the know or you're not, suddenly no one's going to be buying your books of poetry. So there you go, a dividing line. We're across the dividing line. The insufferable John Berryman here has a poem on one side of the dividing line and a poem on the other. So that's bad. that is a tremor in the ground of trouble to come in this psychodrama, since you all wanted me to continue with this year. All right, you're going to get what you want, but not right away. Not right away. First, next week, we return to paradise. Well, that'll have to wait for next week. This week, I'm just properly upset. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I will see you next week. Thank you, BookTube.